this study set out to see how devices are viewed and used within the world, and they discovered that rather than using it as health informatics, they were rather used as lived informatics. Essentially, it took 23 participants and brought them in for an extensive set of interviews in which they asked them what kind of devices they were using, what their history was with these devices, what their motivation was for using these devices, and how they were using them. They discovered that I found the results particularly interesting just because they were using a variety of different devices, but they weren't using them to their fullest extent. They were rather using them for motivation. They were adding in a competitive element. So it was a variety of different uses for each of these devices. They proved that these are more than just basic workout devices, but they can be used for so many different ways and add so many different elements to a healthy lifestyle. Regarding the study as a whole, while I understand that this study was meant to be a lot more personal, given the fact that they were asking very personal questions within these interviews and getting very personal responses, I believe that some of these questions could have been used during a survey, and they could have used a much more larger sample size to get a more holistic view. Because given the fact that the market is in the millions, using a sample size of 23 doesn't exactly give you the most accurate results.
Looking at the 5 styles of personal tracking, which includes directive tracking, documentary tracking, diagnostic tracking, collecting rewards, and fetish tracking, it is important to recognize that users have different goals in mind, whether it be looking at individual measurements such as calories burned or total distance run. This can also be looked at in a long-term basis, such as amount of sleep gotten over a total week or total amount of weight loss over a period of time. It's been noticed that many people like to interweave their trackers, whether it be through different mobile applications or looking at the personal activity that's shared through social media. This social aspect is really important, especially to me, as I use my personal Apple Watch to share my activity and do challenges with friends. These challenges and social aspects, such as doing a step challenge with coworkers, can push people to integrate the personal tracking more integrated to their lives. Overall, however, I think that it's important to note the accuracy of some of these personal tracking devices and applications in order to properly advise and analyze how significantly we should look at this data.
So a large part of the discussion of this study's conclusions surrounds the concept of what the researchers called lived informatics. This paper has interesting findings that, in my opinion, should be considered when analyzing the impact of personal informatics on public health. Although the researchers explicitly note their perspective did not take a stance on the greatest benefits to public health, as a public health policy major, I believe the emotionality of data tracking the researchers refer to is a vital concept to understand. I agree with the researchers as they acknowledge the value of perceiving every person in a unique and individualized way as they apply it with their 5 styles of personal tracking. In addition to the 5 styles, this paper explained how much of the context surrounding the participants' use of data tracking was so very personal in nature. When designing future information ecologies, I believe in an approach that emphasizes respect and dignity for all users, recognizing especially this intimacy of data. As for the temporality of informatics, I learned most of the participants in this study initiated data tracking for short-term use as applied to their long-term interests. I thought this was interesting, as researchers contend personal tracking might best be understood as prospective rather than retrospective. Overall, this research is successful in demonstrating the intricacies of self-tracking data.
The second article is an opinion piece on the potential of self-tracking body hacking technology to improve health and the delivery of healthcare. Through this article, I learned that self-tracking technology can now do many of the same functions as hospital labs, such as tracking REM cycles and blood oxygen levels, and even acting as EKG devices. One issue I found was that the author claims that with self-tracking technologies, patients will be more proactive in maintaining their health and will be advocates for their health at their doctor's appointments. However, he does little to support this statement. Although self-tracking technology exists and presents a wealth of opportunity for chronic disease prevention and detection, it's hard for me to agree that every patient who uses them will become such proactive advocates in their treatments, or will even be motivated to keep using these self-tracking technologies consistently. The author also suggests that the main barrier to using self-tracking devices in healthcare is that many doctors believe that the information collected is unnecessary. But I believe a bigger barrier is getting hospitals to create teams to develop and integrate better charting systems to incorporate self-tracking data that is easy for doctors and patients to read. One thing I liked was that the author concluded with many of his own unanswered questions, because the boom of self-tracking technologies is still a relatively new phenomenon, and the effect it has had and can have on our personal health is still to be seen and analyzed further.